Wonderful. Well, what a great way to kick off our regeneration focus session. I'm Erin Sahan. I work at Donut Economics Action Lab, taking the ideas of the donut and donut economics into the world of business. I'm the former CEO of the World Fair Trade Organization, and a lot of our next discussion that we'll have with our panel will focus on exactly what these tensions can look like and how to navigate the tensions in regenerative business. So I'm going to introduce the panel one by one. Let me begin with Patrick Noddle. He's the founder and CEO of Innovation for Impact, a small impact investment company that invests in purpose-driven founders to drive a circular economy. He's also the CEO of the Chance Makers Foundation. Patrick, welcome. I'm also going to introduce Marie-Sarah Maillard. Marie is the co-founder of Paris-based Regen School, dedicated to experimenting with regenerative business models and leadership with business school students. Welcome, Marie-Sarah. And Flavia Maia. She's a climate leader, an Obama scholar, Dalai Lama fellow. She's a co-founder of the Filha de Sol, a Brazilian nonprofit, and a startup dedicated to inner leadership development. Welcome, Flavia. We're going to kick off with a very simple question, actually, that I think we can all reflect on one by one. And Flavia, maybe I can kick off with you first. Where are you seeing examples of regenerative business, regenerative leadership, and what is enabling them? What is unlocking those examples that you are seeing, those rays of hope?
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Examples of regenerative leadership for me, as a climate activist, as someone coming from Brazil, they come from traditional Black indigenous communities, because these are some of the communities who have care as a core value. I'm someone who identifies as a medicine woman in the Latin American tradition. For us, medicine women, stories and our presence are healing, are supposed to make you whole. So for me, regenerative leadership means having this understanding that you by yourself cannot be an individual regenerative leader if you don't have a culture, a system that supports you. And I think as long as we don't address the colonial mindset, the extractivist mindset behind a lot of the ways we organize as societies, as organizations, as cultures, as communities, we are not having true regenerative leadership. So the short answer is, let's look to ancestral knowledge. We will find many, many wisdom there.
Thank you, Flavia. I'm going to ask the same question to you, Marie-Sarah. You're working in very much with business school students, in education. Where are you seeing these changes happen, and what is enabling and unlocking these regenerative leadership and regenerative business models?
Thank you. I think there is a good news for me listening to Laura and Flavia, is that we talked about this consciousness about living systems and being part of a living system. And this consciousness, I see it a lot within the youth. So working with the youth, you realize that it's not something that you need to learn as much as something that you need to reconnect to, and that we all experienced, especially as kids. And so when you work with the youth, starting maybe just after high school, you see that students still have this consciousness about living systems, and sometimes they kind of forgot it a little bit, but if you let them express their creativity, express their values, their deep values, within finance courses even, then they come up with innovation, they come up with ideas that are starting to look like regenerative businesses. So I see it in the classrooms.
Wonderful, and we're going to move over to Patrick. And Patrick, when we discussed this, what struck me was what you were doing through investment models. Because we all know that extractive finance can often be this great barrier. But you're designing some new models, new approaches. Can you tell us where you are seeing regenerative business in action, and what is enabling and unlocking this approach through your work?
Yeah, thanks. As I run a charitable foundation and a for-profit investment company, I'm giving, just for the first question, I'm giving 2 examples, one of each. So, for example, we are funding a guy called Yannick in Mali. What he's doing is called Kabaku Academies, and his story is amazing because he came as a refugee from Cameroon to Germany, made all his way up here to university, and saw that the classical education system didn't work for him in Africa because he had all the diplomas but never got a job, and it didn't help him or his family. So he went back to Mali and said, how can I redesign education and what's going wrong so that actually local population can be empowered. And what he designed is Kabaku Academies. So what they're doing is they're bringing together, let's call it modern Western technological solutions with indigenous local knowledge. So the training is based on experience, it's app-based, it's not based on the traditional school system that is essentially introduced by colonial powers to keep people down. So it's actually the opposite what they're doing. And one example is, for example, in architecture. Like today, also when we go to Africa, we build these concrete towers because that's what we do in the West, and they're really fancy. They use a lot of energy, and we need air conditioning, which takes a lot of energy. And people have always built with local materials, with clay and other stuff that keeps cool. So what they're trying, one example is they're trying to bring those things together. So get this indigenous knowledge that's already there and that has been forgotten back and combine it with modern technology, so to empower people. So that's maybe one example I would use from the non-profit part. From the for-profit part, I would use the example of a company that's called Wild Plastic from Hamburg. I've been here with them last year, so their clear mission is to get plastic out of the environment that's already in the environment. Not out of the ocean, but out of the countryside before it gets into the river, before it gets into the sea, because it's in the sea, it's hard to get out again. And so their mission is written down in the company, and the company is steward-owned. That means it cannot be sold, and the investors cannot push them towards something that they don't want to do. So they're getting it out. They work with local initiatives. They bring it back and they create new plastic. Of course, they're doing a life cycle analysis and everything. And you can do a lot of things better. Yeah, if you would do it on the ground and recycle and everything on the ground would be better, which is not possible at the moment. So it's also clear that the solution is not perfect, but the mindset within the company, this steward-owned, and the company has a clear purpose. And yeah, investors are supposed to earn some money with it, but there is no unlimited upside for the investor. And putting it down into the structure of the organization is something that I think is very important, which we can follow up on later.
I mean, what's jumping out to me from this discussion is that there are fantastic ways that business leaders are trying to demonstrate that regenerative models can work. At the same time, we have other forces that are working against this, including extractive models of finance, including ownership models that can very much be a hurdle, very much be a barrier. So my question that I want to ask for all of us, and you can all jump in, is can we have regenerative leadership within extractive businesses in the context of extractive finance?
Who wants to start? Okay, then I start. I think it's very hard, to be honest. When I started doing what I do, like in late 2016, I had an idea of what's wrong in the world, but not necessarily of how to do it better. So I started the impact investing part and the charitable part, and I looked at both of these worlds for the past 8 years. And what I see is that you have so many barriers in both worlds that are actually very similar to each other. So let's start with non-profit. In the non-profit world today, you have, and I think everybody who is from an NGO who gets funding here will now nod with his head. So you have two classical things. You have donors that give project-based funding, not unrestricted funding, which means you cannot pay your overhead, which if you're a small local organization is the main thing, because who's supposed to do the work if you cannot pay anyone? Nobody would get to this idea in a business, but in non-profit that seems to be normal for donors. And the second is nobody gives long-term funding. So you can apply for 1 year for something, and again and again and again, and the team spends more time in applying for money than actually in doing the work. And so this is absolutely nuts. And if you walk around and just talk to people who are doing the world, it's not hard to find that out. You don't have to do a dissertation about this. It's very, very easy to see. But still, when I look around our portfolio with around 20 partners, for 90% of them, we are the only donor who's giving unrestricted funding and long-term funding. So it's so obvious. So if you don't have the resources and run in behind them 60% of your time as a founder, how are you supposed to actually provide the impact that you are selling in your fancy marketing? So that's the non-profit perspective, and I think something very similar is happening in the for-profit world. If you have for example, I'm in the startup venture area, so I'll focus on that. If you have a startup that's actually doing something really, really different, for example, you build a model that is based on natural cycles that take 15, 20 years, you won't find funding for that because venture capital wants to pay back after 10 years latest. So they want to scale fast. It doesn't work. If you build something that involves a lot of machinery on the ground and it's not digital, you cannot scale it fast. Like you have to scale everything. You won't find funding. And if you find funding, then venture capital is so extractive by design that your investors, even if you have good investors, even if you have an investor who is an impact fund, and I'm sure many of them are here, and I have invested in some of those. Even if there are good people in that fund who are doing that fund, what they have to promise to their investors doesn't fit the business model that you're doing. So you're always being pushed and pulled, and you cannot really lead in the way that you want to lead. And that's why I think finding the right structure for investment and for grants that is long-term and that actually fits the natural cycle and that has what Laura mentioned, the regenerative design that goes around is the main thing to be regenerative, and it's very, very hard to find money with that. It was a long answer, but yeah.
We had the debate preparing this talk, and for me, I think it's R&D. Regenerative business today is at an R&D stage, and we need to maybe take joy in that. And so yes, it's difficult to find the right structural funding to have the perfect regenerative leadership or the perfect regenerative business. And I don't think it's the goal right now to be fully regenerative. What I hear from what you were saying, Patrick, is also something that we are experiencing, is that the worlds of regenerative consciousness and the worlds of business are very separate. And so for the world of business, it's a bit far-fetched. Like when you talk about regenerative business or regenerative approaches, they look at you a bit like, oh, you're this like crazy person who wants to reconnect to nature. And I think that we have a huge responsibility to provide credibility to the approach. And in order to do so, we need to show and be transparent about the failures, be transparent about the complexity of finding the right models, economic models. And it's, I think, in my point of view, possible. We can go a long way as individuals in our organizations. It's not going to be perfect. Yes, finance and people who give you money and fund your companies do have a huge power, and they can block you in going the whole way, but you can still show, and Laura had a great example with Mercedes-Benz, at a business unit level, at a very local level, you can still do stuff. And if you show to your organization that at a business unit level it works, people are happier, people are more engaged, you drive, client satisfaction up, you have long-term relationship with your stakeholders, then you are already a regenerative leader and you are implementing regenerative leadership. And then, yes, of course, we need the structure.
What I love about what I'm hearing in this panel is that we acknowledge that there is regenerative leadership at the individual level, and it can look like a meditation, like the one we just did. It can look like making space for contemplation and self-care, but this is not enough. And this is what I'm hearing all over this panel, is that we have to push for systems thinking. And we have to have critical thinking to really call the problem by its true name. At the root of extractivist business is an extractivist model that has as its core value capital and not care. And if we don't address this, it will be very hard for any of us to be a regenerative leader inside a broken model. And I really think this should be the main message to take away is, yes, I can be a regenerative leader, but how I can push forward change in business, in society, and in the system. Because the whole reason why we even have an expression, regenerative business, is that because we acknowledge that business is not regenerative. Otherwise, it will be just business. So let's hope for a world, maybe on the next Change Now, that it's just business.
And this is, I think, the heart of the matter. And maybe this will be something that you will pick up in lots of sessions, lots of discussions that you have here at Change Now, which is that two things are true. There is something you can do within the extractive structures. There are also regenerative progress you can make. At the same time, we also need to be honest about the deep structural systemic shifts that are needed in the financing model. And maybe when we say leadership, often the way we've designed companies, finance is in the leadership chair. We can talk about CEOs, but if they're not pleasing the quarterly earnings requirements, if they're not pleasing the board that is elected solely to focus on shareholder interests, then they're out. And I've worked with thousands of CEOs over my career, particularly through Donut Economics, where we ask them, what are the things you know you need to do, but you can't do? Because you're held back by your financial parameters. It's like a straitjacket, the way we've structured companies. So focusing both on the structural shifts and the honesty around this while retaining a hope feels like the central pivot here. But I'm going to pick up on something that Laura mentioned actually towards the end of her presentation around willingness to let die. Because there are lots of very profitable, extractive, degenerative models out there. Opposite of regenerative, degenerative models out there. Fossil fuel companies are making extreme amounts of money. Fast fashion is very profitable at the moment. Big tech that is much more extractive is currently very profitable despite amazing models like Ecosia on the horizon. How do we engage with this? How do we let die those incredibly profitable models while also pushing regenerative ideas?
Well, Laura also talked a lot about courage, and I think that it's the right word, courage to question everything that we've been taught as reality. I mean, economy is a social heritage, and so if you have the courage to question the ultimate goal of a company, which is right now profit and short-term profits, but if you go back to a more conscious capitalism as a first step, then you realize that your company needs first to be useful, and then you go to a deeper level of questioning the usefulness of what you do. And so I think that's the first way to tackle it, to just question the usefulness of what you do as a company, as an organization. And then another maybe more pragmatic answer is that it's dying. And yes, okay, we still don't have a lot of examples of listed companies falling down, but we start to see, especially in the insurance sector, for example, companies getting serious about the risks of collapse. And I think that it's going to help a lot the regenerative thinking, because it's going to be one of the solutions to survive. And so it's happening, so we don't need to do a lot about it. We need to build other organizations and other companies to push another economy, but the traditional one is going to collapse in itself.
I don't know if you're familiar with my friend Nate Hagens. He runs a podcast that's called The Great Simplification. Highly recommended, and he always puts it in a way. He says, either we bend the current system towards something new, or it breaks, and then there will be leftovers and something new will arise. And the question is, will we make it by bending? And that's, for me, the question that you're saying here. So if old models die, are people willing to let them die and transfer to something new? And how to address that? I don't have a real answer for that, because let's face it, when we are speaking here, like, this is a bubble. It's a huge bubble, maybe the biggest impact bubble in the world, this event.
It's a glorious bubble.
It's a glorious bubble, yeah, kind of of the old world outside, but it's a bubble. And I often speak at family office conferences and these things, because I think, okay, you have to influence the most wealthy and powerful people to just use their money in a different way. And I'm just giving you one example, and that's this mindset is so deeply rooted, like the beliefs that you grew up with your education system, that the wealth you have, you deserve this. Okay, your father was rich, you're rich, but you deserve this. That's what you've been told all your life. And letting that go is so incredibly hard. So I'm giving you one small example. I gave a presentation half a year ago at a family office event in Zurich, and I gave a presentation about nature as a role model for investments. And like, after the show, it's always the same thing, like, oh, this was so nice, Patrick, best talk, blah, blah, blah. It was so, like, you get all these claps on your shoulder and you feel really nice. Then you keep standing with these people, and then the topic of wealth tax comes up. And within a blink of a second, the whole conversation goes, okay, we have to get our assets out of Germany, because if it was before the election, because if they win, they will provide a wealth tax, and then we're all done. And like, okay, seconds before you told me, and what? Where is this gone? Like, there you see, like, acknowledging something in your conscious mind is one thing,
yeah.
But getting it down to the subconscious mind, that's where we're struggling so much. And when you talk to traditional business leaders, I'm not sure how many of them actually would be able to deal with a word like regenerative at all at this moment.
Flavia.
It's funny, when we are in bubbles like this, Western advanced economy, we may have the illusion that capitalism is flourishing in fast fashion and big tech, but someone coming from the front lines of climate change, as I am, in one of the hottest regions on Earth, I'm a descendant of climate migrants. So I experienced climate change firsthand, and I know millions of people who do, and they know that capitalism is broken as a system. So I think we should admit this, and I will quote Brazilian thinker and doer, a philosopher from Piauí, Antonio Bispo, and he says, every story has a beginning, a middle, and a beginning. And sometimes our Western way of thinking is so afraid of the end. And sometimes what I hear also in Western cultures is, no, but if we do this, it will be so much sacrifice for us as a culture. We will sacrifice our comfort or our wealth, as you just mentioned. But I think we have been forgetting to consider that it may be actually better to let this die. There is another beginning at the horizon.
And maybe just, Patrick, you said we were in a bubble, and you're right. But let's not forget that business as usual is also a bubble. I mean, finance is a bubble. It's very few people benefiting from business as usual and capitalism. And so it's not a huge mountain that we need to let die. It's a very small bubble as well, benefiting from all of this wealth and the millions of people who are working and in the front lines of climate change. They are the numbers. And I think it's giving a bit of hope also for a more regenerative world.
I mean, I'm going to attempt to, in 33 seconds, sum up, I think, some of the bold ideas that we took from all of you, including from you, Marisa. I think that is an incredibly important reminder that the old world is dying. It might not realize it, and it's in its own bubble. And there are things that we can do to drive that transformation from within that. I think, Flavia, from you, we learned just how critical our perspective is, that actually capitalism might look like it's working in the global north, in the global south, for the global majority. Actually, it isn't. It isn't thriving. It isn't flourishing. The impacts of the climate crisis are hitting people already. And a new world has to be born. It needs to be born. And I think from you, Patrick, what we've learned is that we can build alternative structures. We can have steward ownership models. We can have cooperatives, employee ownership, community-owned models. We can have models that serve purpose. But this requires not just the individual leadership, but the structural design, the design around the business of those investment models that are alternatives to venture capital, to private equity, to publicly listed IPO models. So all of these together, I think, weave together the journey that we need to create the regenerative leadership within regenerative business world. With that said, I'm going to ask the three of you to move on as I introduce our next speaker. But round of applause for Flavia, Marisa, and to Patrick.